Okay, so this is the Gemara, Daf Yomi. We're in Avodah Zarah, Daf 38. So this is for Shabbat, but this is a little after Shabbat now. So at the end of 37, it says, the Gemara raises the difficulty, is fire written in the verse? So there's no mention of fire in the verse at all. How can it be assumed that this is the similarity between water and food? So Daf 38, it says, rather, the cooking of Gentiles is prohibited by rabbinic law, and the verse is cited as a mere support. The Gemara discusses the peculiarities of the prohibition against eating the cooking of Gentiles. So Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says that Rav says, any item that is eaten as it is, meaning raw, is not subject to the prohibition against eating the cooking of Gentiles. The Gemara remarks, in the study hall in Surah, they taught it this way. In Pumbedita, they taught it like this. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says that Rav says, any item that is not eaten together with bread on the table of kings is not subject to the prohibition against eating the cooking of Gentiles. In other words, foods that are not eaten by distinguished individuals are not subject to this prohibition. So the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between these two opinions? The practical difference between them is with regard to small fish, mushrooms, and porridge. These foods are not eaten raw, but they are not eaten by distinguished individuals. Consequently, these foods are prohibited according to the version taught in Surah, but permitted according to the version taught in Pumbedita. Rav Asi says that Rav says small salted fish are not subject to the prohibition of the cooking of Gentiles because they can be eaten raw. So Rav Yosef says, if a Gentile roasted these fish, a Jew may rely upon them for use in the mitzvah of a joining of cooked foods, which must be prepared in order to permit cooking for Shabbat on a festival that occurs on a Friday. So Erevei Tavshilin is basically what they're talking about there. And if a Gentile made them into kasa, the harsena, a dish of fish dried in oil and flour, the dish is prohibited. In this case, since the flour had not been edible, it is considered the cooked food of a Gentile. So the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? What reason would there be to think that kasa b'harsena prepared by a Gentile was permitted? The Gemara answers, this is taught lest you say that the salted fish, which one is permitted to eat, even if cooked by Gentiles, is the essential component. Therefore, Rav Yosef teaches us that the flour is the essential component, and the dish is therefore considered the cooked dish of a Gentile. So Rav Baruna says that Rav says, in the case of a Gentile who ignited a fire in the meadow, all the locusts that were burned in the meadow are prohibited. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of this case? If we say that the reason they are prohibited is that one no longer knows which are kosher and which are non-kosher as a result of their burning, why does Rav Baruna specifically discuss a case involving a Gentile? So even if a Jew burned the meadow, they would also be prohibited for use for the same reason. Rather, this is referring to a case where all the locusts were kosher, and the prohibition is due to the cooking of Gentiles, as the locusts were effectively cooked by Gentiles. So the Gemara raises an objection. Does anyone actually prohibit the cooking of Gentiles in a case like this? But doesn't Rav Hanan bar Ami say that Rabbi Pedat says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to this Gentile who singed the head of an animal, it is permitted to eat part of it, even from the tip of the ear, which is fully cooked. The Gemara remarks, evidently this is permitted because the Gentile merely intends to remove the hair and not to cook the ears. Here too, it ought to be permitted because he merely intends to clear the meadow, not to cook the locust. The Gemara answers, actually, this is referring to a case where there is a mixture of different types of locusts, and they are prohibited because one does not know which are kosher and which are kosher. And the reason Rav Baruna specified that the case involved a Gentile is because the incident that occurred happened to have occurred with the involvement of a Gentile. So the Gemara addresses the matter itself. So Rabbi Bar Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to this Gentile who singed the head of an animal, it is permitted to eat part of it, even from the tip of the ear, which is fully cooked. Ravina said, therefore, with regard to this Gentile who threw a moist peg into the oven in order to dry it out and harden it, a Jew had already inserted a gourd in the oven. From the outset, the gourd is permitted, even though it was in effect cooked by a Gentile. The reason is that the Gentile had no intention to cook the vegetable. The Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? The Gemara answers, it was necessary to teach us lest you say that the Gentile intends to cook the vessel, that is the peg, by softening it. Therefore, Ravina teaches us that he intends only to harden the vessel. So the Gemara continues the discussion with regard to the cooking of Gentiles by examining the halacha of meat cooked by both a Gentile and a Jew. So Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, if a Jew placed meat upon flaming coals and a Gentile came and turned the meat over, the meat is permitted. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of this case? If we say that it is a case where if the Gentile had not turned over the meat, it would have cooked anyway, it is obvious that the meat is permitted, as the Gentile's actions did not actually alter the food. The Gemara suggests, rather, is it not a case where if the Gentile had not turned it over, it would not have cooked? But if so, why is it permitted? In such a case, the meat is certainly considered to be the cooking of Gentiles, not to be prohibited. The Gemara explains, no, it is necessary to teach this halacha with regard to a case where if the Gentile had not turned over the meat, it would have cooked in 2 hours. And now that he did turn it over, it will cook in only 1 hour, lest you say that hastening the cooking process is a significant matter, and therefore food whose preparation is expedited by a Gentile is prohibited. So Ravina teaches us otherwise. The Gemara asks, but doesn't Rabbi Asi say that Rabbi Yochanan says any item that has been cooked like the food of Ben Dorosai, so partially cooked so that it is just about edible, is not subject to the prohibition of the cooking of Gentiles. Consequently, if it is not cooked like the food of Ben Borosai, it is subject to the prohibition of the cooking of Gentiles. Accordingly, meat whose cooking was expedited by a Gentile ought to be prohibited, as this ruling includes cases where it had not been cooked like the food of Ben Borosai at the time of the Gentile's intervention. So the Gemara answers, there, Rabbi Asi was referring to a case where the Jew had placed the meat that was not yet cooked like the food of Ben Borosai in a basket, where it would not have cooked at all, and the Gentile took it and placed it in the oven. So Rabbi Asi was teaching that in such a case, when the current cooking process has yet to begin, the meat is prohibited if it had not already been cooked like the food of Ben Borosai. By contrast, in a case addressed by Rabbi Yehuda, the meat was already cooking, and the Gentile's actions hastened the process, but did not initiate it. In other words, the issue of cooked food like the food of Ben Borosai is relevant only if the Gentile takes a dish that is not being cooked at present. The Gemara adds, this is also taught in a Braita. A Jew may place meat on hot coals and let a Gentile come and turn it over as necessary until the Jew comes back from the synagogue or from the study hall, and the Jew need not be concerned for the prohibition of cooking of Gentiles. Similarly, a Jewish woman may set a pot upon the stove and let a Gentile woman come and stir it until she comes back from the bathhouse or from the synagogue, and she need not be concerned. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If a Gentile placed meat on a fire and a Jew turned it over, what is the halacha? So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, the halacha can be derived by an a fortiori inference. If the meat is permitted when it is finished cooking by the hand of a Gentile, then where it finished cooking by the hand of a Jew, all the more so is it not clear that it should be permitted. Along these lines, it was also stated, Rabbi Bar Chana says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, and some say Rabbi Acha So Rabbi Yochanan says, and some say Rav Acha Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, whether the Gentile placed the meat on the fire and the Jew turned it over, or whether the Jew placed the meat on the fire and the Gentile turned it over, the meat is permitted, and it is not prohibited unless its cooking from beginning to end was performed by the hand of a Gentile. Ravina says the halacha is that this bread baked in an oven that a Gentile lit and a Jew subsequently baked, or alternatively, if a Jew lit the oven and the Gentile baked, or alternately, if a Gentile lit and the Gentile baked, and a Jew came and stoked the coals of the fire, the heat of the fire, it is permitted, as the act of the Jew speeds up the baking process. So the Gemara continues, with regard to fish salted by a Gentile, Chizkiah deems it permitted, and Rabbi Yochanan deems it prohibited. As for an egg roasted by a Gentile, Bar Kapara deems it permitted, and Rabbi Yochanan deems it prohibited. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said, with regard to both salted fish and roasted eggs, Chizkiah and Bar Kapara deem them permitted, even if they were prepared by a Gentile, and Rabbi Yochanan deems them prohibited. The Gemara relates a relevant incident. Rabbi Chia of Parva arrived at the home of the exilarch, whose attendant, so he was the head of the exile community in Babylonia, whose attendants said to him, with regard to an an egg roasted by a Gentile, what is the halacha? So Rabbi Yechia said to them, Chizkiah and Bar Kapara deem it permitted, and Rabbi Yochanan deems it prohibited, and the statement of one sage has no standing in the place where it is contradicted by two. That is, the halacha is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan because he is in the minority. So Rav Zavid said to them, do not listen to him, as this is what Abaye said. The halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Due to the stringency of Rav Zavid sought to impose, the attendants gave Rav Zavid a cup of spiced vinegar to drink, and he died as a result. The Gemara continues to discuss the halakhic status of various foods with regard to the prohibition against eating the cooking of Gentiles. The sages taught in Braita, caper buds, or kaf risin, in leeks, kaflatot, in matalia, in hot water, and roasted grains that belong to Gentiles and were cooked by them are permitted. So an egg roasted by a Gentile is prohibited. With regard to oil, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and his court were counted, that is, voted on the matter and permitted it. It is taught in Braita. Matalia is the same as the black-eyed pea, which is also called shiata. What is shiata? Shiata, yeah. Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, it is 40 years since this item emerged from Egypt and was imported here. And Rabbi Bar Chana himself said, it is 60 years since this item emerged from Egypt and was imported here. The Gemara remarks, and they do not disagree, as one sage issued this statement in his year, and the other sage issued it in his year. Whereas 60 years had passed from the time of Rabbi Bar Chana, only 40 had elapsed when Rabbi Yochanan issued his statement. The Gemara describes the preparation of shiata. They take parsley seeds and flax root and fenugreek root and soak them together in lukewarm water, leave them until they sprout. And then they take new earthenware pots and fill them with water and soak red clay or gargishta in them, and then stick the seeds and roots in the clay. And after that, they go to the bathhouse, and by the time they come out, the plants have blossomed, and they eat from them. And as they eat them, they cool down from the heat of the bathhouse, from the hair of their head until the toenails of their feet. And so Rav Ashi says, Rabbi Hanina said to me, these are mere words, that is, this is false, as it is impossible for the plants to blossom so quickly. And some say this was performed by means of magic words that cause the plants to grow faster. Fenugreek, if you guys don't use fenugreek in your cooking, it is like something else. It is wonderful. Anyway, the sages taught in a Braita, Tanu Rabbanan, the halakha with regard to date husks, or kaspan, that belong to Gentiles and that were heated in hot water depends on the size of the pot in which they were prepared. If they were cooked in a large pot, they are prohibited, as prohibited foods are often cooked in large pots. If they were cooked in a small pot, they are permitted, because non-kosher foods, which are usually large, are not generally cooked in these pots, and it is therefore reasonable to assume that the pot has not absorbed a prohibited substance. The Gemara asks, and what is a small pot? Rabbi Yanai says, it is any pot that is so small that a swallow cannot enter into it. The Gemara challenges, but even if non-kosher foods are not generally cooked in pots of this size, perhaps they sliced the food into smaller pieces and inserted them into the small pot. Since large non-kosher foods can be cooked in small pots once they have been sliced, the concern should apply to these small pots as well. The Gemara accepts this point and mends Rabbi Yanai's definition. Rather, a small pot is any pot that is so small that a swallow's head cannot enter into it. Such small pots may not be used to cook even sliced non-kosher foods. Okay. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but in any case, isn't it taught in Braita that food cooked in both a large pot and a small pot is permitted? This directly contradicts the Braita cited here, which permits only food cooked in a small pot. The Gemara answers, it is not difficult. This first Braita cited above is written in accordance with the one who says, a prohibited substance that imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture is prohibited. Whereas that Braita mentioned here is written in accordance with the one who says, a prohibited substance that imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture is permitted. Rav Sheshet said, this oil that was cooked by an Armenian is prohibited. So Rav Safra rejected this ruling and said, with regard to what need we be concerned? With regard to what need we be concerned? If it is due to the concern that it might have been mixed with wine used for an idolatrous libation, This cannot be correct, as wine ruins oil, and therefore Gentiles would not mix them together. If it is due to the prohibition against eating the cooking of Gentiles, this also cannot be true, because oil is eaten as it is, meaning raw. And if it is due to the oil being cooked in vessels of Gentiles that require purging on account of the prohibited taste that they have absorbed, and now the forbidden flavor from the vessel is in the food, this concern is also invalid, as the absorbed substance is one that imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture, and in this case the mixture is permitted. The sages raised a dilemma before Rabbi Asi. With regard to these boiled dates of an Armenian, what is the halacha? The Gemara interjects, do not raise the dilemma with regard to sweet dates, as they are certainly permitted, since they can be eaten raw. Similarly, do not raise the dilemma with regard to bitter dates, as they are certainly prohibited, since they are rendered edible through cooking. Rather, let the dilemma be raised with regard to dates whose flavor is moderate, so neither sweet nor bitter, which is the halacha. Rabbi Asi said to them, what is your dilemma? The halacha is clear, as my teacher prohibited such dates. The Gemara asked, and who was the teacher of Rabbi Asi? Levi. With regard to shetita'a, a sweet porridge made from roasted grains and honey, Rav deemed it permitted even when it was prepared by a Gentile, whereas Shmuel's father and Levi deemed it prohibited. The Gemara elaborates. With regard to shetita'a, made of wheat or barley, everyone agrees that it is permitted. Similarly, with regard to shetita'a, prepared from lentils to which vinegar is added, everyone agrees that it is prohibited. On the count of vinegar of Gentiles, when they disagree, it is with regard to lentils made only with water. One sage, Levi, holds that we decree a prohibition with regard to this porridge made without vinegar due to that porridge made with vinegar. And one sage, Rav, holds that we do not decree for this reason. The Gemara notes, and some say with regard to lentils made only with water, everyone agrees that the shetita'a is prohibited on account of lentils made with vinegar. When they disagree, it is with regard to shetita'a made of wheat and barley. One sage, Levi, holds that we decree a prohibition with regard to this porridge prepared with wheat and barley due to that porridge made with lentils. And one sage, Rav, holds that we do not decree for this reason. Apropos the mention of shetita'a, the Gemara relates that Rav said, Barzillai, the Gileadite, sent 2 kinds of shetita'a to David, as it is written. And Barzillai, the Gileadite of Rogelim, brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and meal and parched grain and beans and lentils and parched pulse. 2 Samuel 17:28. So Barzillai brought 2 kinds of parched food, grain and pulse. The Gemara concludes, and now shetita'a is taken out in baskets upon baskets to the markets of Nahar Dea. And there is no one who is concerned about that stringent ruling of Shmuel's father and Levi. The Mishnah teaches, in boiled and pickled vegetables of Gentiles, whose usual manner of preparation involves adding wine and vinegar to them, may not be consumed, but one may derive benefit from them. Hizkiah says they taught that this prohibition applies solely to the consumption only where their usual manner of preparation involves adding wine and vinegar, though there is no information about how these particular vegetables were prepared. But where it is known for certain that these vegetables were prepared with wine or vinegar, it is prohibited even to derive benefit from them. The Gemara asks, in what way is this case different